Alright guys, today we're going to finish off our family tree. So that means once you're done today, you can upload it to Focus and get your grade. Make sure everything's filled out. If you need stuff that you're still missing, just go back in the notes from this week. So we did all the parallelograms, right? The types of parallelograms. So if you have a quadrilateral, it's either a parallelogram or not. Today we're going to focus on the ones that are not parallelograms. First one is a trapezoid. Trapezoid has exactly, I can't spell, exactly one pair of parallel sides. Exactly one pair of parallel sides. And most of us have that basic concept of a trapezoid. Again, the word exactly is very important because if it has more, then it would be a parallelogram, right? If it had two sets of parallel sides, it would be a parallelogram. So exactly one pair of parallel sides. Now, there's not really anything special about trapezoids until you get to the fact that they're isosceles. So isosceles is a trapezoid with two congruent legs. And what I mean by legs is your parallel sides are your bases, the other two are your legs. So if those legs are congruent, then you have an isosceles trapezoid. Now once you have an isosceles trapezoid, that's when fun stuff happens. So we have diagonals are congruent. Diagonals are congruent. So think back to rectangle. The diagonals were congruent there as well. So very similar to what we did with rectangles. And then base angles are congruent. And what it means by base angles, the angles touching the same base. So remember parallel where your base is. If this angle is, let's say, 50, then this angle is 50 because they're on the same base. Okay, so your base angles are congruent. So that's trapezoid. And then there's a kite. So a kite has two pairs of consecutive that spells consecutive sides are congruent. So what it means by consecutive is right next, not opposite, because opposite sides of a parallelogram. Consecutive means right next door to each other. Those are congruent. These are congruent, right next door to each other. So make sure that they're not opposite sides congruent, they're consecutive sides congruent. And then they have two special properties. Diagonals are perpendicular. So that means they cross at a 90-degree angle, very similar to what we did with rhombus. So diagonals are perpendicular. That means that diagonal and that diagonal cross at a right angle. Technically 4 right angles, but you get the concept. And then one pair, exactly one pair of opposite angles, I'm going to use a little symbol there, angles, is congruent. So again, what does that look like? Oh, I am terrible at drawing on this. My advice is there is a line of symmetry. There's a line of symmetry that cuts a kite into 2 equal triangles. Those are going to be your 2 equal angles. So if this one's 50, this one's 50. Let's actually try this. So talking about it's one thing, but let's actually try some stuff. So go to your notes paper. So a trapezoid is a quadrilateral with exactly one pair of parallel sides, right? There's your parallel sides. The parallel sides are called the bases. The non-parallel sides are called the legs. So these are called your legs. These are called your bases. We already talked about the theorems, right? If it was isosceles, the diagonals are congruent, so BD is the same as CA. and the base angles are congruent. Okay. So there's another thing for trapezoids. It's called the mid-segment theorem, which basically says a mid-segment here connects two midpoints, so EF is a mid-segment. If you add your bases and cut it in half, you should get your mid-segment. Add your bases, cut it in half, you should get your mid-segment. And these are what we already talked about for kite. Diagonals are perpendicular, so what does that look like? Diagonals cross at 4 right angles, or just a right angle. And one pair of angles, exactly one pair of opposite angles are congruent. Again, draw that line of symmetry. So let's do some actual problems here. So we know this is isosceles because the legs are congruent, which means our base angles are congruent. So if J is 110, see this base, H is 110. Now, I will tell you have parallel lines cut by a transversal. These are still those consecutive interior. They should add up to 180. So you get 70, which makes 70 angle F, and base angles are equal. So it's also angle G. See all that work? Okay, there's not that much work, but I expect to see it. Base angles are, again, isosceles trapezoid, base angles are congruent, so this one is 68. Consecutive, right, same side interior, add up to 180, they're supplementary. So you do 180 minus 68, and you get 112. Oh, I can't put that in there. So angle H is the same as angle G, and they're both 112 degrees. I can't write it in there, it's too tiny. 112 degrees. All right. Moving on, this is that mid-segment theorem at work. So again, add your bases, chop it in half, you should get your mid-segment. So 21 plus 17, cut it in half. What do you get? 21 plus 17 is 38. Half of that is 19. So we know this mid-segment MN is 19. Same concept. Again, bases are your parallel sides. So 64 plus 82, cut it in half. What do we get? 146, cut it in half, and we get 73. So MN is 73. So that's using your mid-segment theorem. This one tells you it's a kite. It's a kite. Again, my advice when you're dealing with kites is draw the line of symmetry. See the 1 and the 2, 1 and the 2? Your line of symmetry goes right down the middle. Right? So you know if M is 88, then K is 88. So that's where you can see where the opposite angles are that are congruent. And then think of a quadrilateral. Quadrilateral adds up to 360, right? The interior angles add up to 360. Subtract out that 88, that 120, and the other 88, right? Subtract out those three angles. All said and done, you should get 64. So angle J is 64 degrees. Moving on, again, find that line of symmetry. Find that line of symmetry. Here's my 1, my 2, my 1, my 2. And there's your line of symmetry. So you know M and K are the same. So my advice in this one would just say, hey, I got 360 degrees. I already used 60 of it, so now we're down to 300. I already used 50 of it, so now we're down to 250. So I've got 250 degrees to split between M and K. So I'm going to need, and I know they're equal, so I'm going to divide by 2. Each one's going to get 125 degrees. So angle M is 125, and angle K is 125. All right, moving on. So again, in a kite, your diagonals are perpendicular, just like when we were dealing with squares and a rhombus. You get these little right triangles going on here, and you can use those to find missing lengths. So here you've got 5 squared, 5 squared. We can find out what C or ST is. So a squared plus b squared equals, and I'm going to call it ST squared. So we got 25 and 25 makes 50. And remember, your last step is to square root. Simplest radical form of 50 can be written as 25 times 2. So the reason you write it that way is because the square root of 25 is 5. You can take it out. We haven't touched the 2. We're going to leave it inside. So simplest radical form would be 5 root 2. And that is ST, which should be the same as SV. All right, so there's one of my answers. And then we set up the other triangle down here. So 5 squared plus 12 squared equals, we'll call it TU squared. So we got 25, 144. What do we get? 25 plus 144 is 169. Take the square root of it to get TU. And you get 13. So you know TU is 13, and you know VU is 13. So you can use those right triangles to find missing pieces, which is the same thing you would have done in number 11. Moving on down here, this is that mid-segment theorem again. Again, you add the bases, cut it in half to find the mid-segment. So we're going to add our bases, 10 plus 44. We're going to cut it in half, and it should equal our mid-segment, which they wrote as 2x minus 1. So what do we got? 10 plus 44 is 54. Divided by 2 is 2x minus 1. 54 divided by 2, we get 27 equals 2x minus 1. 28, add 1 to both sides, and divide both sides by 2, x equals 14. Okay. We'll look at this one and then we'll move on. So here our bases 4x plus 43. Again, cut it in half, and it should equal 32. So I'm going to get rid of this by multiplying both sides by 2. So here we'll get 4x plus 43. Over here we'll get 64. Subtract 43 from both sides. 21. And divide both sides by 4. I'm just going to leave it as 21 over 4. And we're done. 14 is very similar. Very similar. You do it the same way. Here we've got a kite again. So we're going to draw that line as symmetry so we know what stuff is equal. So we know that 2x has to be equal to 111, right? One pair of opposite angles is equal. Divide both sides by 2. And you get x equals 55.5. And you're done. All right, so those were the notes. Make sure you go in. There's 2 separate riddles worksheets. So there's one on trapezoids and one on kites. And do those individually and upload those individually into Focus. All right, bye guys. Make sure you show all your work.